Hello everyone, I'm Ina Man. Welcome to Higher Ground. We have another exciting show this week as we bring you the next episode in our special series, The Moral Case, where we dive into some of the more challenging issues around the resource and environmental debate. Last week, we featured author Alex Epstein in The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. Make sure to check it out. And this week, we have BC-based environmental advocate Ben West and The Moral Case for Renewable Energy. Joining us from our downtown Vancouver studio is Ben West, the Executive Director of Tanker Free BC. Ben is one of BC's top environmental advocates. He has organized strategic campaigns for the Wilderness Committee and Forest Ethics. And now, as the Executive Director of Tanker Free BC, he is leading the charge to stop the expansion of oil pipelines and tanker traffic on the West Coast. Ben, thanks for coming on Higher Ground. First off, tell us a little bit about the Tanker Free BC and how it came to be.
Well, Tanker Free BC is an organization that was formed by a group of concerned citizens in the lower mainland of the Vancouver area, basically as a response to increased tanker traffic in Burrard Inlet. So this group was formed to basically address this issue, to try to raise awareness about what was being proposed, and to talk about how we can reduce the demand for fossil fuels while creating good jobs.
Ben, do you advocate eliminating all fossil fuel use?
Well, I mean, yes, we are completely opposed to the expansion of the tanker traffic. Of course, with a name like Tanker Free BC, you can get the impression that what we're talking about is reducing the demand for fossil fuels entirely. Of course, we're not talking about a zero-sum game. We're not going to get to zero tankers tomorrow. We're not here to shut down the economy or try to pretend that we don't need oil in our lives today. It's really a question about trajectories. Which direction are we heading? Is there ways that we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels while still creating good jobs, while still having an economy that is vibrant and thriving?
Ben, I think some of our viewers might be surprised to hear you frame things this way.
I think we too often look at this as, all fossil fuels or no fossil fuels instead of, how do we reduce dependence and what are the benefits of doing that? That being said, of course, we wouldn't be where we are today as an industrialized society without the role that fossil fuels have played in our lives. I think the question really isn't, have fossil fuels helped us to get to where we are? It's more, how do we maintain our role, sort of trying to stay ahead of the curve? Are we trying to depend too much on the technology of yesterday? And who's benefiting from that? And, what other options are available to us?
You mentioned options, Ben. Renewable energy is what we're talking about today. Is there a moral case for it?
There's various different aspects to this conversation about the moral case for renewables. Part of it comes down to this, just the simple question of how do we reduce our dependence on fossil fuels in the age of climate change. For those who take climate science even halfway seriously, and I think we all have a responsibility to do so, any technology that can help us down that path is something that we, I think, have a moral obligation to explore and to try to support.
Ben, what about those who don't think the science is so settled?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can answer this question. Of course, coming from an environmentalist talking about environmental concerns, you have to have some natural questions about, what perspective you're going to take. So, I mean, usually the way I approach this is I say, you don't have to listen to me, listen to the Pentagon. The Pentagon says that this is one of the biggest threats to national security in the United States that they're facing currently.
But what about the skeptics then?
There are folks out there that are skeptical. They're called scientists. There's a reason why we have scientists. They, use the scientific method to pull things apart and, to challenge every assumption. And, I for one, am willing to listen to the many thousands of scientists who are telling us that this is something very serious. And, for those who question that, I think there's a moral question about what sort of a risk you're taking on whose behalf. Especially given that we're in a world today where I think the alternatives are increasingly viable.
Ben, I'm glad you brought up viable because an argument has been made that renewables like wind and solar are not scalable.
Well, I mean, the question of scale is an interesting one, and to unpack it a little bit, I mean, there's a lot to this conversation. Part of it is a question about the intermittence of, solar and wind. Of course, the sun's not shining all day long, and the wind isn't always blowing as hard as it could be, and it's different in different locations. This is actually a question of the grid itself, how easy or not it is to move from power from one place to another. And there's also questions about batteries and storage. The ability to scale these kinds of technologies is somewhat dependent on the infrastructure related to it. Of course, when you look at the fossil fuel sector, there's the benefits of a grid system and infrastructure that, for one, was heavily subsidized for many years, but has also, benefited from a century of investment from industry. So there is a bit of a game of catch-up to be played, and I think we have a moral obligation at least to level the playing field, if not to try to help the renewable sector along.
Ben, last question. You've made a good moral case for renewables. Can one be made for fossil fuels?
Well, I think, it's an oversimplification to say that fossil fuels are immoral, because of course the fossil fuel sector has helped us to accomplish many things. I mean, without the electricity that we've gotten from coal and oil and gas, without the transportation infrastructure that's been built up, we wouldn't have the quality of life that we have today. I think that's, something that we shouldn't just ignore as environmentalists or, as citizens in our country. That being said, just because of this history doesn't mean that we should double down on the use of this resource.
And that's it for Higher Ground this week. Make sure to visit our website, resourceworks.com, sign up for our e-newsletter, and don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For ResourceWorks, I'm Ina Mann. Thanks for watching.